I never imagined I'd walk in on my cousin like that. When I opened the door, there he was, fast asleep in his room, but something about the scene made me freeze. His posture, the way the light fell across him, it felt strangely out of place. I stood there for a second too long, unsure why it hit me so hard. The summer heat was pressing down, heavy and suffocating. Like every year, I was spending the season at my mom's sister's house. As I stepped out of the car and slung my bag over my shoulder, my aunt greeted me with her usual warmth, pulling me into a tight hug before leading me inside. The house smelled of fresh laundry and faint coffee, both comforting and familiar, but my mind wasn't on that. It was on the fact that I'd be spending the next few weeks in close quarters with Ryan. My cousin. My straight-shooting, confident cousin. It wasn't my first summer with him, but something about this time felt different. Maybe it was just me, but the thought of sharing a space with him made my chest feel tight, my pulse quicken. Ryan had always been effortlessly sure of himself, the kind of guy who never second-guessed anything. He had that cocky grin that drew people in instantly, a natural charm that made friends and strangers alike gravitate toward him. I had learned a long time ago to bury whatever complicated mix of admiration and frustration I felt for him, shoving it deep into a place where I didn't have to think about it. But now, standing in his house again, I could already feel those emotions stirring. "Jake, man, took you long enough." Ryan's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. He was leaning casually against the doorway to the living room, that grin stretching across his face. He was wearing his usual basketball shorts and an easy air of confidence, like nothing in the world could shake him. And nothing else. His shirt clung lightly to his chest, faintly damp from the summer heat. I tried not to stare. "Traffic sucked," I said, keeping my tone steady as I dropped my bag by the couch. "Excuses," he teased, stepping forward to pull me into a quick, rough one-armed hug before shoving me playfully. "You still scrawny? Or did you finally put on some muscle?" I rolled my eyes. "I work out." Ryan smirked. "Yeah, sure. Bet you still lose every game." "Maybe because you cheat?" I shot back, and he laughed. A sound that sent an odd, quick flutter through my chest. Aunt Linda walked in, handing Ryan a bottle of water. "Be nice to your cousin," she said, though her tone carried more amusement than warning. "Jake, your room's the same as always. Ryan, don't keep him up all night with your nonsense." Ryan gave her a lazy salute before turning back to me. "She acts like I'm the troublemaker here." "Because you are?" I snorted, grabbing my bag and heading toward the guest room. He only grinned, following close behind, his presence filling the narrow hallway as we walked. The next few days settled into a familiar rhythm. Afternoons spent outside swimming, playing basketball, or just hanging out, while the nights were filled with lazy conversations and hours of video games. Felt easy, comfortable, the way it always did. But every now and then, there were small moments, fleeting, almost unnoticeable, that made my stomach tighten and my thoughts drift. The way Ryan would stretch after a game, shaking off the day's heat, or the way his voice softened when he was half asleep, talking about nothing in particular. With an arm slung over my shoulders, pulling me close when he laughed at something dumb I'd said. The way our knees or legs would brush when we sat too close on the couch, and neither of us moved away. One night, after another long day of doing nothing, we ended up sprawled out in his room, the soft glow from the TV casting shifting shadows across the walls. Ryan had collapsed onto his bed, one arm resting over his face. I sat on the floor, leaning back against his dresser, staring at the screen without really seeing it. "You ever think about it?" Ryan's voice broke the quiet.
I Frau Ned, glancing over.
"Think about what?" He didn't move his arm, but I could hear the smirk in his tone. "You know, being close with someone in a way people wouldn't expect." My body tensed, my pulse suddenly loud in my ears. I forced a laugh, aiming for casual. "Where's that coming from?" Ryan finally lowered his arm, looking at me with that familiar, lazy confidence. Like he wasn't asking a question that had just tilted my whole world. "Just curious," he said, stretching his arms behind his head like it was nothing. I mean, I've never thought I'd do it, but I get why some people might. Feels like it'd be different, you know? I swallowed, dragging my eyes away and keeping my tone even. Maybe, he chuckled under his breath. Man, if people found out, they'd lose their minds. I smirked faintly. Yeah, they would. His grin widened. What about you? Ever thought about it? I couldn't tell if he was joking or testing me. I shrugged like it was no big deal. Not really. Ryan made a small sound of acknowledgement and turned his attention back to the TV, satisfied. But my thoughts were a storm. Colliding, spinning, refusing to quiet. I didn't know if he had any idea what he was doing to me, or if he knew exactly. Either way, the story didn't end there. It was only just beginning. The next morning, I woke up groggy, my mind still replaying his words from the night before, searching for meaning. Maybe it had been random, maybe not. Either way, I told myself not to dwell on it. He was who he was, and that was all there was to it. I dragged myself out of bed, pulling on a t-shirt, and headed to the kitchen. Aunt Linda had already left for work, and Ryan was nowhere in sight, and the house was still, the only sound the low hum of the ceiling fan. Half asleep, I poured myself a bowl of cereal, spoon halfway to my mouth when footsteps sounded behind me. Damn, you look half dead, Ryan muttered, strolling in shirtless, rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up in every direction. I nearly choked. Ever heard of wearing a shirt? He grinned, stretching his arms overhead, muscles shifting under his skin. Too hot, man. Don't know how you sleep with one on. I kept my eyes on my cereal, trying to ignore the twist in my stomach. Not everyone likes walking around half-naked. Ryan just shrugged, cracking open an energy drink before leaning against the counter, his gaze fixed on me. So, about last night. My spoon froze midair. What about it? He smirked. Relax. I'm not saying anything wild. Just, was it weird me asking that? I forced a casual shrug. Nah, just random. He sipped his drink, studying me like he was looking for cracks in my answer. You sure? You went all quiet after. I was just tired. I lied, meeting his gaze. Ryan nodded slowly, the smirk slipping into something unreadable before he pushed off the counter. All right, if you say so. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, only for him to turn back a second later. Oh, by the way, some of the guys are coming over later. Hope you're ready. For what? I asked, frowning. He grinned. A little fun. I didn't like the way he said it, but before I could question him, he disappeared into his room. Later that afternoon, his friends started rolling in: Chris, Dylan, Marcus, the usual crew. Loud, cocky, the kind of guys Ryan fit right in with. We spent the day outside, shooting hoops, diving into the pool when the heat became too much. It was easy enough to laugh along, but every so often I'd catch Ryan watching me, like he was testing something, waiting for a reaction. By nightfall, the group was sprawled around the living room, trading stories and cracking up over Marcus's latest disaster. That's when Ryan leaned in close, his voice low enough for only me to hear. You ever play Truth or Dare? I shot him a look. Yeah, why? He smirked. Good, 'cause we're playing. And just like that, the game began. Harmless dares at first. Chugging drinks, prank-calling exes, sprinting through the backyard in nothing but boxers. Stupid stuff. But the longer it went on, the thicker the tension got. Then it was my turn. Chris was already grinning like he had something planned. Truth or Dare, Jake? I hesitated. Truth felt dangerous. Dare, maybe worse. Ryan leaned back on the couch, eyes locked on me. Come on, man. Don't chicken out. My pride flared. Dare. Chris's grin widened. All right, The moment Chris spoke, the air in the room shifted. I dare you to kiss someone here. The guys burst into laughter, shoving each other like it was the best thing they'd heard all night. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out most of the noise. Oh, this just got interesting, Marcus said, taking a slow sip of his drink. Damn, Chris, you went for it? Dylan added, grinning. Chris just shrugged, all mock innocence. What? It's a classic. I forced a smirk, though my stomach was twisting. Yeah, well, too bad there's no girls here. That's the fun part, Ryan said. His tone light but his eyes locked on mine. Head tilted, lips curled into that familiar teasing smirk. My palms started to sweat. You're all straight, I pointed out. Marcus shrugged. Doesn't have to mean anything. It's just a dare. Chris clapped his hands. Exactly. Dumb game. No big deal. My throat felt dry. Backing out would only make it worse. And then Ryan leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. His gaze was steady, unreadable, but charged in a way that made my pulse stutter. Come on, Jake. You scared? Something in the way he said it made the space between us feel electric. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I leaned in. Our lips brushed. It was barely a kiss, just the faintest press. But the second it happened, the noise around us faded. And for a heartbeat, Ryan didn't move. He didn't flinch, didn't laugh, didn't even look surprised. He just stayed there, watching me, something unreadable flickering in his expression. Then, as quickly as it started, it was gone. He grinned, shaking his head. Damn, Jake. Didn't think you'd actually do it. I forced a laugh, trying to play it off. Well, you dared me. Chris let out a low whistle. Did not see that coming. Dylan smirked. Kinda looked like you enjoyed that, Ryan. Shut up, idiot. Ryan shot back, rolling his eyes. But the way he glanced at me, quick, almost careful, made my chest tighten. The night went on, but I wasn't really there. My mind kept replaying that split second, the way he hadn't pulled away, the way his gaze had lingered just a fraction too long. It was just a dare, I told myself. Just a stupid, meaningless dare. Ryan was straight. He always had been. He always would be. So why couldn't I stop thinking about it? I told myself to forget it, to shove it in some mental drawer and lock it away. But forgetting was impossible with Ryan sitting right next to me. His arm draped over the back of the couch. Fingers so close to my shoulder I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. When he leaned forward to take a sip of his drink, his knee brushed mine. Probably accidental. Still, every nerve in my body lit up. I needed air. I stood, stretching like I was just tired. Think I'm gonna crash. Long day, I muttered. Chris nodded. Yeah, man. We should probably head out too. The guys groaned about having to leave but didn't push it. They grabbed their stuff, tossed out a few half-hearted goodbyes, and headed for the door. Ryan walked them out, laughing at something Dylan said. I took the chance to retreat to my room, shutting the door and letting out a breath like I'd been holding it for hours. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I dragged a hand through my hair. Stop being weird, I told myself. It was just a game. It didn't mean anything. A few minutes later, the front door clicked shut. Footsteps approached. Then Ryan's voice, closer than I expected. You good? I looked up just as my bedroom door eased open. He was leaning against the frame, one hand braced above his head, eyes scanning me like he was trying to read something between the lines. I forced a chuckle. Yeah, why wouldn't I be? He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. I don't know. You bolted out of there fast. Kinda weird. I shrugged. Just tired. He didn't look convinced. Ryan crossed the room and sat on the edge of my bed like he owned the space, close enough that I could feel the dip in the mattress. This wasn't weird at all. You sure it's not about that kiss? I froze. Ryan smirked, leaning forward with one elbow on his knee. What? You gonna pretend it didn't happen? My throat went dry. It was a dare. Yeah, he said, tilting his head. But you didn't exactly hesitate. I scoffed, forcing nonchalance even though my pulse was spiking. Because if I didn't, you all would have called me a coward. Ryan raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He just nodded, eyes locked on me like he was still picking apart my thoughts. Then he blindsided me. Have you ever kissed a guy before? I stared. That was the last question I expected. Ryan's smirk deepened, like he knew exactly what kind of chaos he was stirring in my head. You don't have to answer if it's too personal. I swallowed hard. Why do you care? He shrugged. Just curious. I didn't have an answer. My heart was hammering too fast, my hands gripping the bedsheets like they could anchor me. Then Ryan leaned back on his elbows, exhaling slowly. It wasn't as weird as I thought it would be. I blinked. What? The kiss, he said casually, like we were talking about the weather. I thought it'd be, I don't know, awkward or whatever, but it wasn't. It was just a kiss. My pulse roared in my ears. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ryan, the cousin I'd spent years trying to ignore my feelings for, sitting there like he hadn't just cracked something open I'd been trying to keep shut, on my bed, telling me that kissing me wasn't weird. I had to be dreaming. He must have noticed the way I was staring, because he chuckled and shook his head.
Relax, man.
I'm not saying I liked it or anything. That stung more than I wanted to admit. I didn't even know why. I forced a laugh. Yeah, obviously. Ryan stretched, yawning. Anyway, don't overthink it. It was just a game. Game. I nodded, even though my mind was screaming. Then, as if he hadn't just dropped a bomb on me, Ryan stood, stretching again. His shirt lifted slightly before he turned toward the door. Night, Jake. And with that, he walked out, leaving me sitting there, heart pounding, head spinning, completely unable to process what just happened. I laid back on my bed, staring at the ceiling. I knew I should let it go, but something about the way Ryan said it wasn't weird, kept looping in my head. Like maybe, just maybe, he was trying to convince himself of something too. And for the first time since he moved in, I wondered if I wasn't the only one feeling something. And I was right. What happened next left me speechless. The next morning, I woke up feeling like my brain had been running a marathon all night. My dreams were a mess. Flashes of the night before, Ryan's smirk, his words, the way he sat so casually on my bed. Like none of it was a big deal. But it was a big deal. At least, to me. I groaned, rubbing my face before forcing myself out of bed. I wasn't about to spend the whole day obsessing over something that probably meant nothing. Ryan was straight. He'd said it himself. He didn't like the kiss. He was teasing, making sure things weren't awkward between us. That was all. But if that was true, why couldn't I shake the way he'd looked at me? Pushing those thoughts away, I threw on some clothes and headed to the kitchen. The house was quiet, and for a second I thought maybe Ryan had already gone out. Then I heard it, the shower running. Of course. I rolled my eyes at myself, trying not to think about him in there, steam curling off his skin. Nope, not going there. I grabbed a glass of water and sat at the table, scrolling through my phone and trying to focus on literally anything else. A few minutes later, the bathroom door creaked open. Footsteps padded down the hall. Then he appeared, towel slung low on his hips, water droplets tracing over his skin, hair damp and messy like he'd just raked his hand through it. I nearly choked on my water. Ryan didn't seem to notice. He strolled into the kitchen like he owned the place, stretching his arms overhead, his abs flexing in a way that felt borderline unfair. Yo, he said, grabbing a protein shake from the fridge and twisting off the cap. Sleep okay? I nodded quickly, setting my glass down before I dropped it. Yeah. You? Ryan smirked over the rim of his drink. Yeah. No weird dreams or anything. I narrowed my eyes at him, wondering if that was a jab. But he just leaned against the counter, sipping casually, like we hadn't kissed at all. Last night felt like a fever dream I couldn't shake. Ryan acting like nothing happened didn't make it any easier. I kept telling myself to stop overthinking, but the memory of his smirk, his voice, the way he sat on my bed like he belonged there, it was impossible to ignore. By the time morning rolled around, my head felt like it had been running laps in my sleep. The dreams were a blur. Flashes of that kiss, his eyes holding mine for a beat too long. I shoved the thoughts aside, threw on some clothes, and wandered into the kitchen. The house was quiet. For a second, I thought Ryan had gone out. Then I heard it, the shower. Of course. I told myself not to think about him in there, water streaming over his skin, steam curling in the air. Nope, not doing this. I poured a glass of water and tried to focus on my phone. A moment later, the bathroom door opened. Footsteps down the hall. And then there he was, towel hanging dangerously low, water still clinging to his skin, hair dripping like he'd just run a hand through it instead of bothering with a towel. I almost choked. Ryan didn't notice. He strolled in, grabbed a protein shake, twisted the cap off. "Yo," he said casually. "Sleep okay?" I set my glass down before I dropped it. "Yeah." "You?" He smirked like he knew something I didn't. "Yeah." "No weird dreams or anything?" I narrowed my eyes. Was that a dig? He just leaned against the counter, acting like this was all perfectly normal. Like we hadn't kissed last night. Like he hadn't admitted it wasn't as weird as he thought. I needed an exit. "I'm gonna go for a run," I said. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you run in the morning?" "Since I needed an excuse to stop staring at you." I shrugged. "Just felt like it." He chuckled. "All right, man. Knock yourself out." I was halfway out the door when he called, "Hey, Jake." I turned, careful not to glance at where that towel was hanging by a thread. He smirked. "You sure you're not running away from something?" I forced a laugh, flipped him off, and left. But the truth? Yeah. I was running because if I didn't, I wasn't sure what I'd do. The rest of the day I kept my distance. Not in an obvious way, I wasn't completely pathetic, but I stayed busy, made sure I was always somewhere else. By sunset, I'd almost convinced myself I'd buried the memory for good. Then came the knock. Ryan leaned in the doorway, casual as ever. "Yo, you want to go out tonight?" I blinked. "Out where?" He shrugged. "Chris is having people over. Could be fun." I hesitated. The last thing I needed was, last night. Like he hadn't practically admitted it wasn't as weird as he expected. I needed to get out of here. Grabbing my phone, I stood. "I'm going for a run." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you run in the morning?" "Since I needed an excuse to stop staring at you." I shrugged. "Just felt like it." He chuckled, shaking his head. "All right, man. Knock yourself out." I didn't waste time heading for the door, desperate to clear my head. But just before I stepped outside, Ryan called after me. "Hey, Jake." I turned, careful not to let my eyes drop to where his towel barely clung to his hips. He smirked. "You sure you're not running away from something?" I forced a laugh and flipped him off, and left. But the truth? Yeah. I was running because if I didn't, I wasn't sure what I'd do. The rest of the day I kept my distance. Not in an obvious way, I wasn't completely pathetic, but I stayed busy, made sure I was always somewhere else. By sunset, I'd almost convinced myself I'd buried the memory for good. Then came the knock. Ryan leaned in the doorway, casual as ever.
Yo.
"You want to go out tonight?" I blinked. "Out where?" He shrugged. "Chris is having people over. Could be fun." I hesitated. The last thing I needed was, last night. Like he hadn't practically admitted it wasn't as weird as he expected. I needed to get out of here. Grabbing my phone, I stood. "I'm going for a run." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you run in the morning?" "Since I needed an excuse to stop staring at you." I shrugged. "Just felt like it." He chuckled, shaking his head. "All right, man. Knock yourself out." I didn't waste time heading for the door, desperate to clear my head. But just before I stepped outside, Ryan called after me. "Hey, Jake." I turned, careful not to let my eyes drop to where his towel barely clung to his hips. He smirked. "You sure you're not running away from something?" I forced a laugh and flipped him off as I walked out. But the truth? Yeah. I was running because if I didn't, I wasn't sure what I'd do. The rest of the day I kept busy. Not obviously avoiding him, at least I hoped not, but making sure I had somewhere to be, something to do. By the time the sun dipped low, I felt like maybe I'd finally shoved last night far enough into the back of my mind, until Ryan knocked on my door. "Yo," he said, leaning against the frame. "Wanna go out tonight?" I blinked. "Out where?" He shrugged. "Chris is having people over. Could be fun." I hesitated. The last thing I needed was, last night. Like he hadn't practically admitted it wasn't as weird as he expected. I needed to get out of here. Grabbing my phone, I stood. "I'm going for a run." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you run in the morning?" since I needed an excuse to stop staring at you. I shrugged. Just felt like it. He chuckled, shaking his head. All right, man. Knock yourself out. I didn't waste time heading for the door, desperate to clear my head. But just before I stepped outside, Ryan called after me. Hey, Jake. I turned, careful not to let my eyes drop to where his towel barely clung to his hips. He smirked. You sure you're not running away from something? I forced a laugh and flipped him off as I walked out. But the truth? Yeah. I was running because if I didn't, I wasn't sure what I'd do. The rest of the day, I kept busy. Not obviously avoiding him, at least I hoped not, but making sure I had somewhere to be, something to do. By the time the sun dipped low, I felt like maybe I'd finally shoved last night far enough into the back of my mind, until Ryan knocked on my door. Yo, he said, leaning against the frame. Wanna go out tonight? I blinked. Out where? He shrugged. Chris is having people over. Could be fun. I hesitated. The last thing I needed was, last night. Like he hadn't practically admitted it wasn't as weird as he expected. I needed to get out of here. Grabbing my phone, I stood. I'm going for a run. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Since when do you run in the morning? Since I needed an excuse to stop staring at you. I shrugged. Just felt like it. He chuckled, shaking his head. All right, man. Knock yourself out. I didn't waste time heading for the door, desperate to clear my head. But just before I stepped outside, Ryan called after me. Hey, Jake. I turned, careful not to let my eyes drop to where his towel barely clung to his hips. He smirked. You sure you're not running away from something? I forced a laugh and flipped him off as I walked out. But the truth? Yeah. I was running because if I didn't, I wasn't sure what I'd do. The rest of the day, I kept busy. Not obviously avoiding him, at least I hoped not, but making sure I had somewhere to be, something to do. By the time the sun dipped low, I felt like maybe I'd finally shoved last night far enough into the back of my mind, until Ryan knocked on my door. Yo, he said, leaning against the frame. Wanna go out tonight? I blinked. Out where? He shrugged. Chris is having people over. Could be fun. The last thing I needed was another night of drinking and bad ideas, but he was looking at me like he expected a yes. And for some reason, I couldn't say no. Yeah, I muttered. Ryan grinned. Cool. Let's head out. By the time we got to Chris's place, the party was in full swing. Music thumped from the speakers, people filled every corner. The kitchen, the living room, even the backyard. I grabbed a drink and tried to relax, but it was hard with Ryan right there. Effortlessly charming, laughing, pulling everyone in like gravity. He'd always been like that. Confident, untouchable. The kind of guy who never seemed to second-guess himself. Which was exactly why I'd spent years trying not to fall for him. But sometime after my second drink, I caught him looking at me. Not just looking, watching. What? I asked. He smirked, shaking his head. Nothing. It wasn't nothing. I could feel it in the way his eyes lingered, in the way he stayed close, like he didn't want me wandering too far. And maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe I was just tired of pretending. But I decided to test him. I turned to the brunette next to me, someone I barely knew, and leaned in, closer than I needed to. She laughed, touching my arm, her body angling toward mine. That's when I saw it, Ryan's jaw tightening. He didn't say anything, didn't cause a scene, but his grip on his drink got just a little too tight, his smile just a little too thin. He was jealous. The realization hit like a jolt. And before I could stop myself, I leaned in even closer to the girl. She giggled, her hand resting against my chest. That's all it took. Ryan stepped forward and caught my wrist. Not hard, not aggressive, but firm. Hey, he said, voice low. Can I talk to you? I raised an eyebrow. I'm kinda busy. His grip tightened just slightly. Now, Jake. Something about the way he said my name made my pulse spike. I offered the girl a quick, be right back, and let him pull me away from the crowd. He didn't stop until we were outside, the cool night air wrapping around us. He let go, running a hand through his hair, exhaling like he was trying to keep something in check. I crossed my arms. What's your deal? Ryan's eyes were sharp. Are you trying to piss me off? I smirked. Why? You jealous? He scoffed, shaking his head, but he didn't deny it. You're acting like an idiot. I stepped closer. And you're acting like you care. His jaw clenched. He didn't back up. If anything, he squared his shoulders, standing his ground, like he was daring me to push him further. So I did. I tilted my head, dropping my voice. What's wrong, Ryan? Don't like seeing me with someone else. He exhaled sharply, his fingers flexing at his sides. For a long moment, neither of us moved. And the tension between us felt like it could snap at any second. The tension between us was thick, humming like static in the air. Then Ryan spoke, his voice quieter than before. Do you really want to know what I don't like? I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. Yeah, tell me. Ryan stepped closer. So close I could feel the heat radiating from him, his breath brushing against my skin. His eyes flicked down to my lips, and in that moment I knew this wasn't a game anymore. Something real was about to happen. What happened next would change us forever. The ride home from the party was silent. Ryan didn't say much, and neither did I. But something sat between us now, dense, charged, like the air before a storm. I kept stealing glances at him, noticing the way his jaw was locked tight, his fingers gripping the steering wheel a little too hard. He hadn't looked at me once since we got in the car, and I couldn't tell if he was angry, confused, or feeling something else entirely. When we finally pulled into the driveway, he cut the engine and just sat there, staring ahead. I waited, expecting him to say something. Instead, he exhaled slowly, ran a hand through his hair, and got out without a word. Fine. If he wanted to be weird, that was on him. I followed him inside, shutting the door behind me as he disappeared down the hallway toward his room. I stood there for a moment, debating whether I should just go to bed or force him to talk about whatever was eating at him. Before I could decide, I heard his bedroom door click shut. So that was that. I sighed, running a hand down my face, then headed for my own room. But sleep didn't come easy. My mind kept replaying the night. Every glance, every brush of contact, every time Ryan stood too close without stepping away. The way his eyes had lingered on my lips. The way he'd pulled me away from that girl like he couldn't stand to see me with her. It didn't make sense. Ryan was straight. He had always been straight. So why was he acting like this? I tossed and turned for what felt like hours before exhaustion finally won. My eyelids grew heavy, and I let sleep take over. I don't know how long I was out when I woke, but it was still dark. The house was silent except for the low hum of the air conditioning. I rolled over, blinking the sleep from my eyes, then noticed my bedroom door was slightly open. Had I left it like that? Frowning, I sat up, rubbing the back of my neck. Maybe I'd forgotten to close it properly. I glanced at the clock. 3:47 a.m. Shaking my head, I swung my legs over the side of the bed. Maybe I just needed some water, or maybe I needed to get up and shake off whatever strange energy was still clinging to me from earlier. As I stepped into the hallway, I hesitated. Ryan's door was cracked open too. That was unusual. He never slept with his door open. Something about it made my stomach tighten, but I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe he'd just been too tired to shut it all the way. Still, before I even realized it, my feet were carrying me toward his room. The moonlight slipping through the blinds painted soft shadows over the space. Ryan was on his bed, lying on his back with one arm draped over his face. His breathing was slow, steady, deep. He was completely out. I should have left right then, but my eyes drifted lower, and that was when I saw it. The sheet was barely covering him, twisted around his legs like he had kicked it off in his sleep. His boxers had shifted, leaving him completely exposed. My breath caught in my throat. I should have looked away. I should have turned around and left, but I didn't. I couldn't. Heat crawled up my neck, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I knew I was staring. I knew this was wrong, but my body wouldn't move then. Suddenly Ryan shifted. A small noise escaped his lips, a low sound, almost like a sigh. His hand twitched against his stomach, fingers curling slightly before relaxing again. I swallowed, my throat dry. I had never seen him like this, completely unguarded, vulnerable in a way He never was when he was awake, and for a split second a dangerous thought crossed my mind. Would he wake up if I know? I took a shaky step back, my breath unsteady. What the hell was I doing? I needed to leave now, but just as I turned to go, Ryan shifted again, this time rolling onto his side, his lips parting slightly as another soft sound escaped him, and that was when his eyes fluttered open. This time his eyes fluttered open, BL, and unfocused at first, then sharpening as they landed on me. For a long moment neither of us moved. I didn't know if he fully understood what was happening, if he was still half asleep, still trapped in the haze of his dreams. His brows pulled together slightly, his lips parting, as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Then something changed. His gaze flickered downward for the briefest second, realization creeping in his body, going rigid, but instead of panicking, instead of freaking out, he just stared at me, breathing a little too fast, his chest rising and falling in uneven patterns, and that was when I knew he wasn't stopping me, he wasn't pushing me away. His hand twitched against the sheets, his fingers curling, his breath catching just slightly, his lips parted again, and when he spoke his voice was horror low. What are you doing? I couldn't answer. I didn't have the words, but I knew what I wanted, and Ryan wasn't stopping me. The space between us felt suffocating, the tension thick, the weight of everything pulling us closer, until hesitation no longer existed. Then, before I could stop myself, before I could second guess, I moved, and this time Ryan didn't pull away. His breath hitched, his muscles tensing, but he didn't stop me. Instead his body responded tentatively at first, then all at once, like something inside him had been waiting for this without him even knowing it. The tension that had been simmering between us for days, for years, finally snapped, and everything that had been unspoken, denied, buried, came rushing to the surface in a dizzying, unstoppable wave. It was heat, it was fire, it was everything I had never let myself think about, everything Ryan had never let himself feel until now. His fingers curled into the sheets, his body shuddering slightly beneath mine, his breathing ragged, uneven, but he still wasn't stopping me. If anything, he was pulling me closer, his movements hesitant yet desperate, like he was fighting himself and losing. I felt his resistance crumble, felt the shift from uncertainty to something deeper, something real, and then in a moment that I would never forget, he let go. I couldn't believe this was real, but it was so amazing. Then, without warning, I turned him around and we did the thing. I can't go into details, but it was like we were exploring something the two of us had both wanted for a long time. There was nothing left but the overwhelming desire that had consumed me. Time blurred, the room felt smaller, hotter, the silence filled only by the sound of our breathing was uneven, the air thick with confusion and something neither of us wanted to name. For a heartbeat, the rest of the world faded away, and then, just as quickly, it was over. We stayed there in the dim light, our shoulders brushing, both of us still catching our breath. Ryan's eyes were wide, his chest rising and falling fast, as if he couldn't quite believe what had happened. My own thoughts were a tangled storm. It didn't make sense, and yet somehow it did. The silence was crushing. I swallowed, my throat dry, and forced myself to sit up. Ryan kept staring at the ceiling, his expression locked somewhere between disbelief and something I couldn't read. His shoulders were tight, like he was bracing for impact. Finally, he spoke. What just happened? His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight I couldn't name. I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. Ryan let out a shaky laugh, the kind that wasn't really laughter at all, and then his expression hardened. We can't. This? He shook his head, still not looking at me. This didn't happen. My stomach nodded, but I managed to nod. Yeah. My voice sounded hollow. But it did. He pushed himself up, pulling his shirt back on. He looked wrecked, like the ground had shifted under his feet. I don't know what we're doing, he said at last, his voice low. But he stopped, the rest of the sentence falling into the quiet. I hesitated. But what? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. I don't think I can stay here. Not like this. His tone wasn't cold, but it was distant, like he was already somewhere else. Panic gripped me. Ryan, please. He turned then, his gaze sharp. You need to understand something, he said, his voice like a quiet warning. Whatever this was, it doesn't mean what you think it does. I started to speak, but he held up a hand. Let me finish. He stepped closer, crouching in front of me, locking eyes in a way that made everything else disappear. I didn't do this because I was lost or confused, he said. I did it because I needed to know if I could walk away. I needed to prove to myself that I could. The words sank into me like ice. What do you mean? Ryan's smile was faint, bitter. You think this is about us, about what we could be. But I'm not sure that's real. He raked a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. I'm not who you think I am. Half the time, I don't even know who I am. And I can't keep pretending. We don't fit into the boxes you want to put us in. We never did. His words hit harder than I expected. I sat frozen, my voice barely audible. So what now? I barely got the words out, my voice no louder than a whisper. Ryan stood, but didn't head for the door right away. I don't know, he said quietly. I'm not leaving because I don't care about you. But I'm not staying because it's right either. I need time. I nodded, feeling my heart break in slow motion. But I didn't cry. There was nothing to cry about, at least not in any way that made sense. No clear answers. No neat resolution. And somehow that felt like the hardest part of all. I don't think we'll be the same after this, I said softly. Ryan paused at the door, his hand resting on the knob. For a second, I thought he might say something, maybe something comforting, maybe not. But instead, he just shook his head, his eyes carrying a sadness I couldn't fully understand. No, he murmured, almost too quiet to hear. But maybe that's what I need to figure out. Then, without another word, he left. I stayed in the empty room, the silence wrapping itself around me like a heavy blanket. I tried to piece together something that had already shattered, but there was nothing to hold on to. Maybe I wasn't supposed to. Maybe the truth was that there are no answers, not yet anyway. Sometimes, things just happen, and all you can do is live with the aftermath, no matter how messy it is. And that was my last thought before the door clicked shut behind him. No words, no promises, just the quiet. Was I wrong? Did I handle this the right way? I'd really like to know what you think. If you've ever been in a moment like this, or if you understand what I'm feeling, share it in the comments. Your thoughts mean a lot to me right now. I don't have all the pieces figured out yet, but maybe that's part of the journey. I'm not leaving because I don't care about you, but I'm not staying because it's right either. I need time. I nodded, feeling my heart break in slow motion. But I didn't cry. There was nothing to cry about, at least not in any way that made sense. No clear answers. No neat resolution, and somehow that felt like the hardest part of all. I don't think we'll be the same after this, I said softly. Ryan paused at the door, his hand resting on the knob. For a second, I thought he might say something, maybe something comforting, maybe not. But instead, he just shook his head, his eyes carrying a sadness I couldn't fully understand. No, he murmured, almost too quiet to hear. But maybe that's what I need to figure out. Then, without another word, he left. I stayed in the empty room, the silence wrapping itself around me like a heavy blanket. I tried to piece together something that had already shattered, but there was nothing to hold on to. Maybe I wasn't supposed to. Maybe the truth was that there are no answers, not yet anyway. Sometimes, things just happen, and all you can do is live with the aftermath, no matter how messy it is. And that was my last thought before the door clicked shut behind him. No words, no promises, just the quiet. Was I wrong? Did I handle this the right way? I'd really like to know what you think. If you've ever been in a moment like this, or if you understand what I'm feeling, share it in the comments. Your thoughts mean a lot to me right now. I don't have all the pieces figured out yet, but maybe that's part of the journey, I said softly. Ryan paused at the door, his hand resting on the knob. For a second, I thought he might say something, maybe something comforting, maybe not. But instead, he just shook his head, his eyes carrying a sadness I couldn't fully understand. No, he murmured, almost too quiet to hear. But maybe that's what I need to figure out. Then, without another word, he left. I stayed in the empty room, the silence wrapping itself around me like a heavy blanket. I tried to piece together something that had already shattered, but there was nothing to hold on to. Maybe I wasn't supposed to. Maybe the truth was that there are no answers, not yet anyway. Sometimes, things just happen, and all you can do is live with the aftermath, no matter how messy it is. And that was my last thought before the door clicked shut behind him. No words, no promises, just the quiet. Was I wrong? Did I handle this the right way? I'd really like to know what you think. If you've ever been in a moment like this, Or if you understand what I'm feeling, share it in the comments. Your thoughts mean a lot to me right now. I don't have all the pieces figured out yet, but maybe that's part of the journey.